There was a police officer who pulled up to the driver's window of a car that he pulled over. The driver of the car said, "What's the matter, officer?" And the policeman said, "Well, I clocked you going 75 in a 55-mile-an-hour zone." And the man said, That's impossible. I was only going 65. His wife, who was sitting next to him in the seat, said, "Oh, Harry, you were going 80. So he glared at her. And the policeman said, "I'm also going to have to give you a ticket because you have a broken tail light." And the man goes, "Broken tail light? I didn't know that." And his wife said, "Harry, you've known about that for months." Again, he glared at her. And then the policeman said, "And finally, I'm going to have to give you a citation because you weren't wearing your seatbelt." And he said, "But I was wearing it. I took it off when you were walking up to the car." His wife goes, "Harry, stop lying. You never wear your seatbelt." And this time he looked at her and he said, "Close your mouth or I'm going to close it for you." The policeman looked at her and said, "Ma'am, does your husband always talk to you this way?" And she goes, "No, sir, only when he's drunk." So we all have done things that we hope no one finds out about, right? Sometimes we sin, sometimes we let God down, sometimes we blow it. But I'm here to tell you that God is the God of second chances. He's the God who takes on our mess and can make it our ministry. He's the one who takes our pain and can make it our platform. He's the God of the do-over, the Lord of the mulligan. And in 2 Samuel, we're going to read a story about a young man who had struggled in life and needed a do-over. He needed somebody to give him a second chance. We're going to look at his story, and we're also going to look at a few of the disciples of Jesus, how they had a moment where they blew it and needed an opportunity for a second chance. So are you ready for this? Yeah, all right. Well, let's get excited and let's move on here, because we're going to look at this. 3 truths to remember when you fail. 3 things, all right? Number 1 is that he takes our hurt and he gives us hope. He takes our hurt and he gives us hope. And on Memorial Day weekend, we remember those who have gone before us. And so sometimes in our remembrance, sometimes there's hurt and there's pain. And this is a time where we remember those military people who paid the ultimate sacrifice and gave of their lives. And so for them, today is a day to remember them or this weekend and remember their families and the price that they had to pay. And then we look at what happened in Texas. Elementary kids, little kids. And our hearts broke as we saw the news and as we read the things and reading I read the timeline. It's just like, come on. Why does this have to happen? And so my heart breaks for those parents and for the kids that endured what they endured. So sometimes we hurt in life and we need some hope. And in 2 Samuel, we read a story, 2 Samuel 9, starting with verse 1. We read a story about a young man who needed some hope. It says that one day David, this is King David, king of Israel, asked, "Is anyone in Saul's family still alive? Anyone to whom I can show kindness for Jonathan's sake?" So here's the situation. Saul was the king before David, and Jonathan was Saul's son. And Jonathan understood the situation. In the ancient Middle East, whenever a king would pass on and a new king would take over, it was common for the new king to have the children and the grandchildren of the former king killed so that those kids couldn't come back and try to take over the throne. Jonathan understood this, and he knew that in all likelihood David would end up being the next king, and he didn't want anything to happen to his kids. So he approached David before he was king, while Saul was still king, and said, "Can we enter into an agreement, an oath, a covenant, a promise to be kind to each other's families So if you're king, you don't hurt my family. If I'm king, I don't hurt your family. And David agreed to that. And all these years later, he remembers the promise that he made. Says a lot about his character, right? And so here's David all of these years later. And in verse 2, he's now the king. And it says he summoned a man named Ziba, who had been one of Saul's servants. The king then asked him, is anyone still alive from Saul's family? If so, I want to show God's kindness to them. Ziba replied, yes, one of Jonathan's sons is still alive. He is crippled in both feet. So David sent for him. His name was Mephibosheth. He was Jonathan's son and Saul's grandson. Now, Mephibosheth, try to say that name. I have a Bible dictionary that tells me how to pronounce some of these names. This one wasn't in it. I had to do some research to find out how to spell this dude's name. But I finally did, and so thankfully I can present that so that I don't just call him Mephibi or something like that. So here's his situation. He's 5 years old. His dad, Jonathan, and his grandfather, Saul, are killed in battle. And the nurse who was caring for Mephibosheth, when she heard of their death, she scooped him up and started to run. And as she's running, so it is believed that she tripped and fell, dropped the child, and he sustained an injury that got him to the place where he could no longer walk. It's a horrible thing. And here he is at this point in his life, still unable to walk. His life being changed. He's lost his father, lost his grandfather. He's grown now, has his own son, and probably could use a do-over. And here David is about to give him that. Heartbroken, needing a second chance. D.L. Moody, the great preacher, said on any given Sunday, in any given town, in any given church, on any given pew, there lies a broken heart. And I think that we could probably go up and down the pews, and we could probably go inside that camera and into the homes of the people that are watching this somewhere else today and find out that there are many people watching right now who are hurting and needing hope. And the good news is we have a God who gives second chances. So whatever that hurt is, there is hope for the healing of your broken heart. Throughout my life, I've noticed that those times in my life when I've been at my lowest, when I've been hurting the most, are the times that I've been at my strongest spiritually. They're the times that I've grown the most. And I think it's because in those times you have to rely on God, and it's because of His presence that changes everything. Paul Claudel said, Christ did not come to do away with suffering. He did not come to explain it. He came to fill it with His presence. Corrie ten Boom said, to realize the worth of the anchor, we need to fill the storm. So let's consider the disciples, right? Because we're going to use them as examples. In the first New Testament, the first disciple example is Judas Iscariot, best known for being a traitor. This is the guy who sold out Jesus for a bag of money. The guy who betrayed Jesus, who stabbed him in the back. And on the night that Jesus was arrested, he's in the Garden of Gethsemane with a few of the disciples, and here comes Judas, backed by some soldiers. And he walks up to Jesus, gives him a kiss on the cheek, because that was the plan, that I'm gonna let you know which one to arrest by kissing him on the cheek. And as he approached Jesus, here's what Christ said to him, Matthew 26:50, my friend, go ahead and do what you've come for. What did he call him? Friend. The guy who had betrayed him. Look, if I'm Jesus, I don't know that friend is the word that's coming out of my mouth. That's not what I'm thinking about somebody who just stabbed me in the back. But Jesus is telling him, look, the damage has been done. You've already done what you've done. But look, it doesn't have to end here. There's still hope. Now, unfortunately, Judas didn't accept that hope. He didn't receive that second chance, and according to the story, he went and hung himself. A guy who was hurting offered a second chance, but he didn't take it. Rick Warren, who's the pastor of Saddleback Church in California, lost his son several years ago to suicide. And about 2 weeks after his son's death, this is what Rick Warren posted on Twitter. "In pain, I'd rather walk with Jesus with all my questions than walk by myself with all the answers." Wow. It's powerful. The faith that it takes to write that. He wrote, "Problems force us to look to God and depend on Him instead of ourselves. You'll never know God is all you need until God is all you have." So the first truth is that He takes our hurt and He gives us hope. The second truth is that He takes our doubt and destroys our fear. And some of you today may be on the fence. You may be doubting. You may be like, look, I'm on board with God, but I'm just not sure He can bring me through this. Or maybe you're a skeptic or an atheist or an agnostic who's like, look, I don't even know that God exists. I don't even believe. That's okay. I think it's all right to have doubts as long as we seek those answers. Now, when we go back to our story, even Mephibosheth, you're going to see here, he has some doubts. In 2 Samuel 9, 6 through 10, it says, "When he came to David, he bowed low to the ground in deep respect. David said, 'Greetings, Mephibosheth.' Mephibosheth replied, 'I am your servant.' 'Don't be afraid,' David said. 'I intend to show you kindness because of my promise to your father, Jonathan. I will give you all the property that once belonged to your grandfather Saul, and you will eat here with me at the king's table.'" Now, Mephibosheth had reason to be afraid. He knew how things usually worked. Often the king would kill the children and the grandchildren of the previous king, so he knew that. And maybe he's coming in fear. But David had great things planned for him. He told him that he was going to let him eat at the king's table. Now, this wasn't a temporary honor. This wasn't just some one-time invitation to come eat with the king. This actually came with a pension from the king. So this invitation was going to change his life. Everything would be different from now on. So Mephibosheth, in verse 8, bowed respectfully and exclaimed, "Who is your servant that you should show such kindness to a dead dog like me?" Now, in Bible days in Israel, dogs weren't loved like they are now. Now people love their pets, their puppies. But in Bible days, it was different. They were considered dirty, nasty scavengers, kind of how we see rats. I was in Chicago one time after dark, and my wife, this was long before we got married, and my wife was showing me around Chicago, and I said, "I want to see the Michael Jordan statue," and so she was taking me there, which probably wasn't a good idea to go there after dark, but she's trying to find, and this rat ran across the street right in front of us that I promise was the size of a cat, but it wasn't a cat. This thing was so big, I did a full body shiver for about 5 minutes. That's how we view rats, right? Like I even hate mice. They freak me out. Several years ago when my son Dylan was in the first grade, I think, we caught a mouse in our house. And there was no way I was going near it. So I paid him $20 to take the trap and go throw it away for me, which he was glad because that was a lot of money for him. But that's how we see rats, and that's how people saw dogs back in those days. And so here Mephibosheth is not only calling himself a dog, he's calling himself a dead dog. It's like he's calling himself a dead rat. Why would you do anything for a dead rat like me? Now, I don't know if he saw himself in this way, or if he's just overcome by, wow, this is amazing, this invitation. Or maybe he doesn't believe him yet. But verse 9 says, "Then the king summoned Saul's servant Ziba and said, I've given your master's grandson everything that belonged to Saul and his family. You and your sons and servants are to farm the land for him to produce food for your master's household. But Mephibosheth, your master's grandson, will eat here at my table." The invitation to eat at the king's table. Now, our disciple or New Testament example is Thomas, known as Doubting Thomas. He's best known for being a pessimist. He's the one that when word came out that Jesus was alive, that he had risen from the dead, Thomas was the one that was like, "Yeah, I doubt that. I mean, really, nobody comes back to life." I mean, there was this Lazarus guy, we saw that happen, but that's because Jesus made it happen. I really don't think this happened. And it wasn't until Jesus showed up in the house and said this, John 20, 27 and 28 to Thomas, "Put your finger here and look at my hands. Put your hand into the wound in my side. Don't be faithless any longer. Believe." And look at Thomas' response. "My Lord and my God." He didn't believe at first, but once he sought the answer, he saw and he believed. Years ago, when I was in college, I went on this camp team that went all over the country to different camps, youth camps. And we went to 8 of them, 8 different states in 8 weeks. And all the way from Colorado and Arizona to Pennsylvania and Virginia and some in between. And our job was to do whatever they needed us to do. Maybe that was preach. Maybe it was to lead worship. Maybe it was to be in a cabin with kids. And it was a lot of fun, great time. But our 3rd week of the tour, we arrived in Pennsylvania to a camp that I affectionately call Hell Camp, because I think that maybe when the devil was a kid, I think maybe he went to that camp. If not, his presence was real there, I can tell you. This was the wildest camp I'd ever been to. I'm talking 100, 150 high schoolers, but there was a group of about 20 boys who were wild. And this camp was so wild, we found this out after we arrived, that the previous year an adult male counselor packed up his things in the middle of the night and left, not because he was angry, because he was afraid. Apparently, he had gotten on the bad side of some of these high school boys and woke up in the middle of the night, tied up with rope, hanging from the rafters of the cabin. Now, this is not good news to me. And so the first night, we're in this cabin with probably 50 to 75 boys, and it's not like some camps where they split you into different cabins, divide and conquer. This was all of them in one giant cabin, and let me tell you, it was chaos. It was one of the craziest nights I've ever experienced. I think I heard an explosion at one point. Someone's bed was set on fire. It was chaotic. And part of my job there as a 20-year-old was to help protect these students. But I have to be frank. I pulled the covers over my head and said, "God, I don't care what happens to them. You just get me through this." So the next morning, I was happy that I had survived. So it just so happened that on the 3rd night of the camp, they were having me preach. Now, this might not seem like a big deal, but I'd only preached twice in my whole life. And the other issue was that the first 2 nights, a youth pastor and a senior pastor, so professional preachers, and they had a horrible time. They accomplished nothing. They spent their whole time, because of this large group of crazy kids, they spent their whole time going, "Stop that, don't do that, be quiet, put that knife away," all kinds of things. It was crazy. And so I'm thinking, if they don't listen to these professionals, how are they going to listen to me? So I decided I needed a plan. And here's what I did. I found the camp loudmouth. You know what I'm talking about? There's one in every church. It's that person that you can tell them something and 5 minutes later everybody knows. That person. Don't look around and try to see if they're here. I found that kid and I told him, "Hey, tonight I'm the preacher. I'm only going to talk for 15 minutes. Well, within minutes, everybody knew. So after lunch, I'm walking through the woods on this trail, and as I'm walking, suddenly this group of boys, the ones who were the wildest, surrounded me. They appeared out of nowhere. I have no idea where they came from. And they just started circling me like a pack of wolves. And I remember thinking to myself, so this is how I'm going to die. Okay, well, this is interesting. And so finally their leader spoke up. I think his name was Charles Manson. And he said, you know what, Mark, there's a rumor going around that you're the preacher tonight and that you're only going to talk for 15 minutes. And I said, yes, sir, that's true. And he goes, good. Make sure you don't go over. I'd hate for anything to happen to you. And I said, don't worry. And they went off on their way, I'm sure, to spread a little sunshine to somebody else. I got there that night. I got up, and everybody got quiet. And I said, tonight, what I have to say is going to take me 15 minutes to say. But what I have to say is the most important thing you're ever going to hear in your life, because it could determine whether you spend eternity in heaven or hell. So because this is so important, and because I love y'all so much, I'm going to say this until I know you've heard it. So if I see you talking or maiming someone, I'm going to assume you haven't heard, and I'm going to repeat myself until I think you've heard. So if you'll listen, I'll be finished in 15 minutes. If not, we could be here all night. They were completely quiet. And I talked to them about our need for Christ and our need to have Jesus come into our life and change us from the inside out. And I invited them to come down to the altars that they had at the camp and to give their lives to Christ. And when I did that, all these kids came. Sorry about that. All these kids came and started coming down and praying, and many of them giving their hearts to Jesus. As the service was coming to an end, I was standing over by the door in case I needed to make a run for it. And that group of boys surrounded me again, out of nowhere. I don't know how they do this. And Charles Manson spoke up and he said, you went 2 minutes over. And I went, oh, really? And he goes, yeah. And then his eyes started getting misty. And he goes, thank you, man. And he gave me this hug, and I was like, yes, I'm going to survive hell camp. So they left, and this girl walked up to me, real pretty, blonde-haired girl, real tall. She was very tall. She was like 5'8". She was so tall. And she walked up to me, and she said, can I talk to you? And I said, sure. And we kind of went off to the side, and she said, I don't know how to tell you this, but I don't believe in God. And I said, whoa. For someone who didn't know how to tell me, you told me. And so I realized that I can't prove that God exists. And I can't show a picture. This is me and God. Look, he even signed it. There's no way I can scientifically prove that he exists. All I could do was tell her how he had changed my life. How he had helped me break bad habits. How he had helped me overcome sin. How he had brought me through some things that I had done or things that had been done to me. My friend Larry, who was a pastoral ministries major, was there with us, and we just told her stories, and then we prayed with her and sent her on her way. Well, the next night, I'm standing at the front pew, the front row, as kids are down praying again. And I'm right there on the end, and this girl comes down the aisle, and she grabs me by the hand and leads me down to the altar. Larry saw us go down, so he came down, and she said, last night, all I could think of was the story after story after story that you told. And so before I went to bed, I prayed for the very first time in my life. And I said, God, if you're really there, then help me believe in you. And she said, I woke up this morning and the doubts were gone. The fear was gone. The confusion was gone. I still have questions that need to be answered, but I know that there's a God. We asked her if she'd like to accept Jesus as her personal Savior, and she said yes. And that night I prayed with a girl who the night before said, I don't believe in Jesus, and now she's given him her life. Because even when we have doubts, if you seek the truth, you're going to find the truth. Amen? St. Augustine said, faith is to believe what we do not see. The reward of this faith is to see what we believe. And number 3, he takes our shame and grants us grace. He takes those moments that we hope nobody ever finds out about. And next week, I'm going to preach a sermon called The Me That No One Sees. And it's going to talk about our private life. And how I can take that private life and I can keep you from seeing it for most of the time, but eventually it's going to come out. And so it's in those moments of shame that we don't want people to see what's really inside. We don't have to live that way because God takes our shame and grants us grace. The example from the New Testament is Simon Peter, who's best known for being a hothead. The Bible includes 4 lists of the 12 apostles. In all 4, Peter's the first one mentioned. He stands out as the leader and spokesman for the 12. He's eager, aggressive, bold, and outspoken, but he also has the habit of revving up his mouth while his brain is still in neutral. He is the apostle with the foot-shaped mouth because he often puts his foot in his mouth. So we go back to that place in the garden on the night that Jesus was betrayed, when Judas brings in the soldiers. And it says in Luke 22, 49 through 51, when the other disciples saw what was about to happen, they exclaimed, Lord, should we fight? We brought the swords. And one of them, that's Peter, struck at the high priest's slave, slashing off his right ear. But Jesus said no more of this, and he touched the man's ear and healed him. Crazy, right? Now we know that Peter was a fisherman, not a fighter. I don't know if he had any training in swordsmanship, and this is just my weird take on it, but I think Peter was going for his head. I don't know that he was going for his ear. I think he was going for his head and missed. But what if he wouldn't have missed? What if he would have taken the guy's head off and Jesus had to attach the guy's head back? That would have been cool, right? I mean, the ear thing is great, but what if he had to put his head back on? Just weird things come into my head like this. I know. You should live with me. But Peter slashed off the guy's ear. Jesus put it back and scolded him. But his night was about to get worse. Because later that night, as Jesus is awaiting this kangaroo court of a trial, 3 times Peter was asked, hey, haven't I seen you with him before? I think that you're one of Jesus' guys. And all 3 times Peter's like, well, no, you didn't see me with him. I do not know that man. And then after he denied him the 3rd time, the rooster started crowing. And Peter, in his mind, went back to the previous night when Jesus said, before the rooster crows, you're going to deny me 3 times. And Peter and Jesus turned and met eyes. Peter ran from the city and wept bitterly. But just a few days later, Jesus was alive. He had been crucified. He rose from the dead. And in Mark 16, 6 and 7, some women come to the tomb, and an angel is there and says this to them, don't be alarmed. You are looking for Jesus the Nazarene who was crucified. He is risen. He's not here. See the place where they laid him. But go, tell his disciples and Peter, he is going ahead of you into Galilee. There you will see him just as he told you. Did you catch that? Tell the disciples and Peter. He called him by his name. As if to say, make sure he knows that we're going to offer him a second chance. That is not over. What a powerful moment. So when we go back to our story in 2 Samuel 9, Verses 11 through 13, Ziba replied, "Yes, my lord the king, I'm your servant, and I will do all that you have commanded." And from that time on, Mephibosheth ate regularly at David's table like one of the king's own sons. Mephibosheth had a young son named Micah. From then on, all the members of Ziba's household were Mephibosheth's servants. And Mephibosheth, who was crippled in both feet, lived in Jerusalem and ate regularly at the king's table. Blessed, not by anything that he did, but by the grace that David showed him. And you know what? That name, Mephibosheth, means he who scatters shame. And that's exactly what David did for him. And that's what God does for us. He scatters our shame and grants us grace, all because he is the God of second chances. Let's pray. Father, thank you for the grace that you've shown us and for the mercy that you've provided for us. May in these few moments, may you speak to our hearts, and may we listen and be prepared to respond in whatever way you're calling us to do. In Jesus' mighty name.